In the midst of the Hollywood awards season, crowded with fantasy and sci-fi epics, and frontrunners dominating the headlines, we may have to squint to notice the underdogs beneath all the noise. But Walter Salles' Brazilian historical drama, I'm Still Here, has somehow managed to become a top contender. And in this analysis, I want to uncover what about this film has made it so powerful for viewers. Which greater thematic messages emerge from the film, original book, and the ending? And what is so special about Fernanda Torres' portrayal of Eunice Paiva? And we'll discuss this movie in 3 sections: the backstory, the symbolism, and the message of I'm Still Here in this deep dive analysis. The backstory. As first-time viewers of this movie, we're immediately dropped in the middle of 1970s Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And although this film very purposely begins in 1970, it seems it would be best in this analysis to go back just a few more years and give some background on the family's father, Rubens Paiva, and what this man represents politically and thematically for the film. In 1963, recently elected Sao Paulo Congressman Rubens Paiva became the vice president of the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry, the CPI. The CPI was built to investigate any institutions who were spreading and funding dishonest propaganda against the current left-wing leaders who were in power. As both a politician and an activist, Paiva was tirelessly dedicated to stopping these corrupt institutes who were plotting to end the Brazilian democracy and implement a dictatorship. In 1964, a military coup was put into action and successful, overthrowing the Brazilian president, ending the almost 20-year Brazilian Republic, and initiating the Brazilian military dictatorship. Paiva's title as congressman was revoked, forcing Paiva into self-exile for 6 years. After the 6 years, unable to revisit his political career, Paiva returned to Rio de Janeiro with his family and worked as a civil engineer. And this is where the film we're watching begins. And however, also as we see in the film, Paiva can't resist the urge to fight the military dictatorship. And without his family knowing, he continues to collaborate with and assist exiled left-wing militants and guerrilla members fighting against the regime in power. And as also seen in the film, military members are sent to Paiva's house to arrest him. The reason for this isn't mentioned directly in the film, but the military believe Paiva was in some way connected with a man named Carlos Lamarca, arguably Brazil's most militant guerrilla rebel at the time, who, as you would assume, was at the very top of the government's most wanted list. And to tie this history and the film together, Carlos Lamarca was the one who orchestrated the kidnapping of the Swiss ambassador who we hear about in the movie, hoping to return him in exchange for prisoners in Rio, prisoners fighting for freedom like Rubens Paiva. And just about all of the major events in the film play indistinguishably close to the real events and timeline of the true story. So let's dig a little deeper into the artistry of the film and how it symbolically uplifts us even within the darkness of the period in the next section of this video. The symbolism. One piece of information that may come as a surprise to you is the director of this film, Walter Salles, knew the family as a teenager and actually spent time in that house in 1970. In many of his interviews, he reflects on the family's open-minded discussions, their wide-open doors, party music, and free-spiritedness that radiated across their community. And knowing that, it comes as no surprise how Walter Salles captured that exact energy so vividly in the first act of his film. He was there. Walter, in many interviews, mentions how his use of the grainy 35mm film and the classic Super 8 camera allowed the cinematography to capture the texture of the time. The fluidity of the editing, the lively camera work, and the presence of the endless beach view and ocean waves represented this humanity, freedom, and peace that Paiva and his family had even within the oppression of the dictatorship. And Walter expands on this by saying, "In that house pulsated the possibility of another country. A country we wanted to be a part of, with new architecture, the architecture of Brasilia, for instance, the Nehemiah architecture, The new music from Caetano Veloso and Gilberto Gil, it's called the Tropicalia movement. The Cinema Novo, the new cinema that was blossoming. All of that was somehow censored during the military dictatorship, but it was still alive in that house, and we embraced it because that family embraced it. The Paiva House represents a culture of democracy and the freedom of expression. The Oscar Niemeyer architecture was in itself a modernist, forward-thinking cultural movement artistically in Brazil. The Tropicalia music we hear inside was a movement that took the traditional foundation of Brazilian music and fearlessly blended in its own experimentation and new, fresher, less conventional ideas. And Cinema Novo, which translates to New Cinema, was another artistic movement that took a more grounded, realistic, human style of filmmaking, which challenged a lot of traditional, more glamorous or theatrical filmmaking styles. Everything in, on, and around that house was glowing with artistic freedom and social progress. As the country is undergoing a military dictatorship, I think that to live, to listen to music, to exchange ideas was a form of resistance for the family. And then at a certain moment, something happens, and the whole situation shifts. And the film becomes a film about the reinvention of a mother of that family. And it's an extraordinary celebration of the human spirit. So now, having spoken about Paiva, his family, and his home, let's discuss the most primary inspiration for the creation of this film, Eunice Paiva, in the next section of this video. The message. Of course, at least by the end of the film, you surely understood that this movie is based on a true story. But this movie was also inspired by a book written by Marcelo Paiva, the son in the film. And yes, it's the book we see him publish in the movie, also titled, I'm Still Here. And Fernanda Torres herself does a great job of explaining what the book is aiming to say. This is a story based on a book by Marcelo, who was the young boy in the movie. And one day he writes this story because we all knew about Rubens Paiva and what happened. But this woman was always hidden in a way because she never felt the need to be recognized for what she was and what she did. And it took many years for his son to write a book where he says the real heroine of the family is her, who stayed in silence. And it's revolutionary, this woman, in a very private way. And very clearly, this is also the goal of the film as well. The aim of the film, just like the book, is to shine a spotlight on the unimaginable strength, stability, and courage she demonstrated during the darkest and most horrific period of her life. And both Marcelo and Fernanda explain how her display of strength is so unconventional. It's this colossal form of heroism within such a gentle, kind, modest, and nurturing demeanor. And this seems to be how Fernanda Torres' performance stands so tall without any melodramatic or wildly emotional scenes. While many excellent performances can shine through the emotions they can reveal, Fernanda's performance shines for the exact opposite reason. It shines for the emotions she isn't revealing. The tragedy, sorrow, anger, frustration, disappointment, pain, and fear is always just peeking beneath the surface of her warm, smiling exterior that holds her family together, which is an even bigger challenge for an actor to pull off. Fernanda calls it a feminist tale without the protocol of feminism, which I think is precisely what the film is. It all feels effortless because it stems entirely from reality. It took 25 years for Eunice to finally seal the open wound of her husband's disappearance by receiving the death certificate, which is why she smiles. The National Truth Commission determined Paiva died on the second day of his arrest from injuries related to torture. But neither Eunice nor her son Marcelo believed in hiding from the dark reality of their past. They describe Marcelo's book as retracing the memory of his mother, his family, and his country. My mother is losing her memory, and the country is losing its memory. And such a theme couldn't be more perfectly captured than in the final scene of this movie. When a news report addresses Ruben's case and he appears on screen, the elderly Eunice, now suffering from dementia, seems to suddenly recollect her past and recognize the current moment with clarity. Such a theme highlights how the importance of memory and confronting our past is a crucial tool in creating progress. Marcelo mentions how the scale of injustice in the country remains the same 29 years after democracy was restored in Brazil, as we still witness economic disparity and forced disappearances very much like 1971. Whatever country you're from, so many of the same cyclical, systemic issues continue to reappear, even after decades. But by remembering the darkness in which they stem from, and by reflecting on the truth of oneself, only then can we begin to fearlessly deconstruct them.